The sales takeaway is basically the opposite of pushing your product on a prospect. So think of a product pushing salesperson that's, saying, this is what I sell, it's great, you'll love it, you got to see it, right? Well, the sales takeaway is the exact opposite of that. So instead of saying, you're going to love this, it's great, you're kind of taking it away. So you're saying, I don't know if this is a good fit for you, I don't know if you're going to like this, I don't know if it's going to fit, and you're taking it away what you're, instead of trying to sell. So it's a really powerful tactic. It's a bit advanced and it's a bit complicated, so we're going to dive into it in a bit more detail. And so some examples of doing a sales takeaway is just to simply express doubt. I just kind of did that a minute ago to share you some examples, but and you could express these when you're closing or when you're presenting what you have to sell, when you're just starting a cold call. It's a really powerful thing to do. And so you can say, hey, I don't know if you need what we provide. I don't know if we're a good fit for you. I don't know if we can help you in the same way we've helped others. I don't know if you are interested in those improvements I just shared with you. I don't know if you're concerned about any of those areas I just shared with you. I don't know if you're the right person to speak with. I don't know if it makes sense for us to talk. Maybe this isn't the right time for you to look at this. Maybe we're not the right product for you. Maybe this is more than you need right now. So those are some examples of expressing doubt, and I'll tell you why you would want to do that and when you want to do that. But another way to do a sales takeaway is when in doubt, call it out. So there could be times where you're talking to a prospect and you're doubting whether or not they're a good fit, or if it makes sense, or if they're going to really need what you sell. And if you're a product selling salesperson, you just kind of ignore that, and maybe you turn it up a notch to try to talk about more features and push your product more. But another thing you can do is you can do a takeaway. When you start to sense a doubt, you can call it out. And so some examples of that is, let's say you're talking to a prospect and you ask them like pain questions and they don't have any pain, right? Well, you could start to kind of begin to walk away with a sales takeaway by saying something like, well, I don't know, it sounds like you guys have done a pretty good job of putting the right pieces in place. Maybe it doesn't make sense for us to spend too much time talking. So there's a takeaway. Now, it's not to say you close the file right after that and say, have a great day, but you're doing a takeaway, and you're doing it to try to trigger a reaction, and I'll talk to you in a minute about the reactions this will trigger and when to do this, but that's an example of a takeaway. Another example could be, let's say that the prospect is sharing interest, but they don't appear to have a lot of pain. Let me give you an example of a car dealership. So let's say that someone comes to the car dealership and they want to do a test drive, and they love your car, they love the car that they're looking at, but they pulled up in a pretty nice car that's like a year old, right? So you should have some concern that this person doesn't have any pain. So sure, you could still maybe go on a test drive, but maybe it doesn't make sense to go on a test drive, or you might want to kind of not spend a lot of your time with this prospect. Not to say that you would say, oh, I can't take you on a test drive, but you can do a takeaway to kind of see what's going on with the prospect. So let's say they pull up in a nice car. Well, here's an example of what to say. You could say, and this is more of a B2B example here, but where you let's say someone loves your product, but they don't have any pain. Well, I tell you what, I'm a little concerned. You seem very interested in our system, and that's great, but your current system seems to be working pretty well. I'm worried that our teams might spend a lot of valuable time. Then you might find trouble getting funding for this because your current system's working pretty good. So that's a B2B example. Converting that back to the more simple example of a car, you could say, hey, yeah, well, that's great that you love this car. We could go do a test drive. I'm just a bit concerned because you just pulled up in a car that's less than a year old. So, I mean, I just don't want to waste your time doing a test drive. We're going to have to do a bunch of paperwork. I'm going to have to get your driver's license. I'm going to have to get the keys. I don't want to waste your time. Are you really looking for a new car, or am I potentially going to waste your time? So those are some examples of doing a sales takeaway. Now the key thing is when to do the sales takeaway. And so I'll make it very simple here. I'm going to give you 3 different scenarios. So the first scenario is everything's positive, right? So this is when a prospect loves what you sell, right? So then you have neutral, where someone's on the fence. So this is where someone could be expressing, not necessarily expressing interest in moving forward, but they're also not expressing interest, a lack of a confirmation that they don't want to move forward. So they're not saying I'm not interested or we don't want any. They're also not saying let's move forward. And then you have negative, where the prospect saying I'm not interested and this is not a fit. And sometimes the negative could be that they're just not contacting, they're not responding at all, so they're completely dark. Now, so if we look at these 3 scenarios, like I said, you would never, if someone's in the positive scenario, you'd never want to do a sales takeaway because you're moving forward. So don't try to take it away because you're moving forward. When they're in the negative, you don't really need to do a sales takeaway because they've already taken it away. It's like if they're not responding to your emails, you don't send them an email saying, I don't know if this is a good fit for you, because there's no need to. They're not responding, or they're saying, I'm not interested. So you don't need to take it away. The real time where you want to do the sales takeaway is when someone's on the fence or unsure, or you're unsure about them, which is where you do a sales takeaway. And when you do a sales takeaway, there's 3 different things that can happen in terms of reaction. One is that you do a sales takeaway and there's no reaction. This isn't likely because a sales takeaway is a pretty bold thing to do and to say. So it's not likely, but let's just say one of the outcomes is no real reaction. But one thing that can really happen is that the prospect confirms your disqualification. So if you say, let's say, and let me give you an example. Let's say that you're calling a prospect and they keep rescheduling your meeting, right? They've rescheduled your meeting 3 times. They're not saying we don't want to meet, so they're not negative, and they're not saying let's meet because they're rescheduling, so they're not positive. But it's just this in the middle kind of neutral, like they keep rescheduling. So are they interested or not? You could do a sales takeaway to say, we can reschedule, no problem at all, but maybe this is just not the right time for you because it sounds like you guys are pretty busy over there, and maybe you just don't really have time to spend on this right now. And so that's a sales takeaway. So in that scenario, the prospect could confirm that takeaway to say, you know what, it's really not. The best thing to do would probably be to catch up next year because we're just swamped with this implementation. It's just, if we meet, I'll just be distracted, or I'm going to reschedule with you again. So they confirm the disqualification. Third scenario is that they challenge the disqualification. So if we go back to that same example, you say, well, maybe this isn't the right time for you guys since we're rescheduling all the time. Then the prospect could say, no, I'm sorry, I had some distractions. This is extremely important. We have to get this done this year. So let's meet. My calendar's wide open on Wednesday. Pick a time, right? So what happened there is the prospect challenged the disqualification. So what's real powerful there is when the prospect challenges the disqualification, a lot of times they're going to give you reason to continue to move forward, and that reason could actually be new information. So in the example I just gave you, the prospect shared that they have to get it done with this fiscal year's budget, and now maybe you didn't know that before. So that's extremely powerful, and what happens there is when you do the sales takeaway, if a prospect challenges the disqualification, then they actually start to sell you on why it makes sense to keep moving forward. So instead of you being a product selling pushy salesperson trying to get them to meet, you're turning the tables, doing a takeaway, and the prospect starts to sell you. So it's a really powerful thing, and it's great when that happens. Now, you may look at those 3 scenarios and say, well, but if you do the takeaway and the prospect confirms it, that's a bit risky and a gamble, and you made a mistake. And the reality is that if you do the sales takeaway For a prospect that's in the neutral position, if you've done a decent job of qualifying them and communicating the value you offer, and you've done the right blocking and tackling before that, then if the prospect confirms your takeaway, it probably is not a qualified prospect. So you should feel confident that if you do a takeaway at the right time and you've done the other stuff, if they do go away and you either put them on hold or remove them from your pipeline, it's a positive because you are most likely saving yourself time. If I go back to the same example, if the prospect agrees that it doesn't make sense to meet, you most likely saved yourself from wasting time in a meeting where either the prospect wasn't fully present, or they would have rescheduled on you again, or the prospect wouldn't have been able to move forward for some reason because they just don't really have a need, and that's why they were canceling you in the first place. The sales takeaway is a pretty powerful tactic, and why you might want to strategically add this in is, for one thing, is that the takeaway, it's one of the most powerful ways and quickest ways to build rapport. When you do a sales takeaway, you're doing the exact opposite of what 95% of salespeople do. 95% of salespeople are product pushing salespeople, and they will just push until the prospect goes away or they can't push anymore, right? So when you do the takeaway, you're doing the exact opposite of what all those other salespeople do. So that's going to make the prospect respect you and see you totally different than other salespeople, maybe different than the majority of salespeople they've ever dealt with, and they're going to feel comfortable with you. It's going to help you to improve credibility. If you are doing a takeaway, you're looking out for the prospect's best interest. When you say, maybe this isn't the right time for you, or maybe this isn't a good fit, you're looking out for their interest, not yours. Your interest is to close a sale and make commission. Their interest is to make a good decision and make a good purchase. So you immediately establish credibility that you're trustworthy because you're looking out for their interest, and you establish credibility. You improve the quality of leads in your pipeline because you're going to filter out. Some of those takeaways are going to get confirmed, and those bad leads are going to get out of your pipeline. So you're going to improve your close rate. You're going to decrease the amount of time you waste on bad leads. You're going to improve deal momentum because some of those deals that are stalled out in neutral, you're going to get to move forward. You're going to uncover new information. Just as I told you, if the prospect challenges your takeaway, be sure to listen closely because it's very likely they're going to share with you reasons why it makes sense to move forward, and those reasons could be new information, powerful information. By the way, information you can then use throughout in the remainder of the sales cycle. So when the prospect says, no, we need to get this done this year because of budgetary issues, it has to be in this year's budget, listen and keep that information, because then when they, later in the sales process, you might want to throw that information back at them when they're not responding or wanting to reschedule. And when you add up any of these factors, more rapport, more credibility, better quality leads, moving deals forward, new information, all of those will lead to you improving your overall close rate.